Good afternoon, and welcome to today's virtual program, Science at the Forefront. My name is Laura Nash, and I am a member of the Business Women's Giving Circle at the Community Foundation of Northern Virginia. A little bit about the Business Women's Giving Circle. We bring together engaged women who want to support positive change for girls and young women in our community. Launched in 2014, by the Community Foundation for Northern Virginia, the Business Women's Giving Circle invests in innovative programs that empower girls and young women in Northern Virginia. We connect meaningfully with members and grantees and inspire others to join the power of collective philanthropy. We've awarded more than $535,000 to organizations providing experiences in science, technology, engineering, and math with measurable impact on the lives of over 3,500 girls and young women in the area. A few housekeeping items before we move right into the program. Everyone except for the panelists and moderator will be muted throughout the program. Please put any questions in the chat. We will be asking the questions at the end of the presentation. But if you have thoughts or comments throughout, please feel free to chat all you like. In today's fireside chat, moderated by Elli Nesbitt, we will hear from two impressive scientists who helped lead the Foundation for the National Institutes of Health, Stacey Adam, PhD, and Courtney Silverthorn, PhD, will discuss their career journeys and perspectives as women leaders in STEM fields. We'll cover the evolution of science and technology career fields, insights, successes, and lessons learned from two successful women scientists, and leadership advice. Let me introduce Elli Nesbitt, a strong supporter of STEM. Elli has held many leadership and board roles at the chapter and national levels as a longtime volunteer with ARCS Foundation. She was chapter co-president during 2020 to 2023 and is currently chair of the Council of Presidents at the national level 2024 to 2025. She has served on the communication teams at the national and chapter levels, and is also a current member of the MWC Communications Council. Elli is employed as a senior international trade analyst at the U.S. International Trade Commission, and she has been a project leader, author, and invited speaker on topics ranging from pharmaceuticals to the circular economy to sustainable manufacturing. She earned a BS in chemistry and an MS in chemical engineering from Manhattan College. In her spare time, in addition to hiking and traveling, she volunteers as a docent at the National Air and Space Museum. Let's welcome Elli.
Thank you, Laura. Hello, everyone. Let me tell you a little bit about ARCS Foundation. It's a nationally recognized nonprofit started and run entirely by women who boost American leadership and aid advancement in science and technology. To address the need for new scientists and engineers in the United States, we provide unrestricted funding to help the country's brightest graduate and undergraduate students create new knowledge and innovative technologies. Our Metro Washington chapter sponsors students in STEM studies at 5 local universities: Georgetown University, George Washington University, Johns Hopkins University, the University of Maryland, and the University of Virginia. Today, we have several ARCS members in the audience, including our national president, Beth Wainwright, and ARCS scholars. But now I would like to introduce you to the real stars of the show, these two wonderful women of STEM, as Laura mentioned, Stacey Adam, PhD, Vice President, Science Partnerships-Translational Services Foundation for the National Institutes of Health, and Courtney Silverthorn, Vice President, Strategic Alliances and Innovation, Translational Sciences, also with FNIH. These professional businesswomen of STEM will talk about the professional climate and culture for women working in STEM fields. Would you each please introduce yourself? Tell us who you are and what your current life entails. Let's start with Stacey. What do you do in your role as Vice President of Science Partnerships and Translational Sciences at the FNIH?
Thanks, Elli, and thanks to the committee for putting this together. Really appreciate the invite to be here. So, as Vice President in Science Partnerships, I actually oversee a number of our large public-private partnerships with multi-stakeholders involved. My particular portfolios cover cancer, metabolic disorders, COVID, both acute and long, and our clinical innovations portfolios. So number of different things throughout my day. No 2 days look the same. I've been with the foundation for just a little shy of 9 years. Before that, I was in corporate consulting at Deloitte in their federal and strategy practice. And before that, I started as a bench researcher. So cancer was my background, and did my grad work at Duke and my postdoc at Stanford. And again, that'll all come into play as we talk about our trajectories. So Elli, I'll turn this back to you.
Thank you, Stacey. Courtney, your turn. Could you please tell us about yourself and what you do in your role as Vice President of Strategic Alliances and Innovation at the FNIH?
Yeah, thank you, Elli, and thanks so much for the opportunity to be here today. This is one of my favorite things to talk about is the winding career trajectories that we often find ourselves in. So I've been with the FNIH for a little over 3 years, and when I joined the FNIH in 2021, one of the 40% of the pandemic job changes that everyone was doing back then, I was in our science partnerships department, and so started out in a role very similar to Stacey's with my own portfolio of public-private partnerships in what we affectionately landed on as calling platform therapeutics, which was to say things that cut across multiple disease areas, typically didn't fit nicely into one of our existing portfolios, and usually had some sort of regulatory question associated with them. Back in March, I was able to transition over to our Strategic Alliances department, and now have the responsibility of overseeing the business development portfolio for the entire FNIH. So this is everything from idea capture through the exploration and design of a new public-private partnership, all the way through to the execution, and working very closely with our science partnership colleagues along the way. And I oversee the team of individuals that are responsible for our project-directed fundraising. So these are the usually companies and patient-specific foundations and other nonprofits that are coming on board for one of our public-private partnerships and contributing both their scientific expertise, but also financial or in-kind contributions to the foundation to help support that project. Before I was at the FNIH, I've been government or government adjacent my entire career. So I was with the Commerce Department for a number of years, working across the entire spectrum of agencies that do research and development within the federal government, coordinating a lot of policy, regulation, legislative opportunities. Before that, I did tech transfer for the National Cancer Institute in one of their contractor facilities, so working very closely with the scientists on their own tech transfer agreements and inventions. My PhD is in pharmacology, and I did my dissertation in melanoma research, and did not use that one bit after grad school, but it was a really great opportunity at the time, and looking forward to talking more about the journey from there.
Well, thank you, Courtney. I have questions for both of you right now. I'd like to start with the first one. While you have ascended through your careers, how did you decide on the career path to follow after you earned your degrees, and have mentors been important to your career development?
Yeah, I can go ahead and start with that question since I alluded to it right at the end of my introduction. So I wanted to be a scientist since I was about 10 years old, and from a very early age, even though neither of my parents went to college, they nurtured my interest in the sciences, and so there was kind of almost no question that I was going to go to college and get a degree in the sciences, and then on to grad school and so forth. I had what I call my quarter life crisis when I was 25, about halfway through grad school, when I realized that while I still really loved science, I couldn't stand the thought of being in a lab for 40 years, and then didn't know what else I could do with a degree in the sciences that wasn't bench science. I had thought I was going to go work for a pharmaceutical company after grad school. And fortunately for me, around that time, Johns Hopkins was, albeit a bit reluctantly, accepting the fact that not everyone who graduated with a PhD in the sciences was going to go into bench research. And so they had set up a series of career seminars for what they call alternative careers in the sciences, although I think it's about 70% of us who actually end up in those alternatives. And so I went to a bunch of seminars about, grant review processes and consulting and scientific writing. And I ended up going to one that was led by someone who worked in the Johns Hopkins Tech Transfer Office. And I thought, oh, this is really cool. Can I learn more about this? And she said, I'm teaching a class online. You should take it. And so I did end up taking that class. And Lee Penfield at the Hopkins Tech Transfer Office was really instrumental in kind of helping me find that pathway out of the lab and into something a little bit more aligned with my interests and desires. Along the way, I haven't had a lot of formal mentorship opportunities, but I would say that there have been a number of people in my career who have been transformational. Some very supportive bosses along the way who really gave me opportunities to step up. I know that throughout my career, I've frequently been the only woman in the room, and for a very long time the youngest person in the room, although that seems to be changing the older that I get, but who really took a chance on me and kind of believed in what I could do along the way. And so I think that that's been one of the biggest contributions to my career development from there.
Thank you, Courtney. Stacey?
Yeah, so I guess if you look back, and I'll take a similar trajectory to Courtney's. I was always interested in the sciences as a kid. I won't say that my parents quite understood that. My parents were always very supportive of whatever it was that I wanted to do. But when I told them I was going to go to college and major in clinical lab science, which of course is the actual clinical labs in hospitals and things, they kind of looked at me like, this was I was foreign to them, even as their youngest child. But again, I have to commend them that they supported that. I finished my undergrad degree, spending most of the time at University of Nebraska-Lincoln, but finishing at the Med Center, which is pretty standard if you're going to do the clinical lab science degree. I actually thought I was going to go to med school, and it was good that I did the clinical last year, because it taught me you get sent up for rotations on floors, especially for phlebotomy rotations. Taught me that I wasn't really going to have a personality to deal directly with patients. And so that was good. That sort of changed the trajectory of where I was going, and ended up applying to go to graduate school. Really liked the lab. I count myself very lucky that I got into Duke, where I did my grad work. Found myself with an excellent graduate student mentor, really kind, caring, compassionate. He actually really valued his graduate students, which then inspired me to go on and do a postdoc. I actually thought for a long time I was going to be on the trajectory to be faculty. So much so that I stayed in my postdoc 5.5 years, got to the end of it, and realized, wow, I don't want to be here. I don't want to be in academics anymore. I don't like academic politics, and I need to find something else to do with my life. So after you've been on that trajectory for, 11 years, I, unlike Courtney, going laterally into pharmaceuticals didn't even appeal to me. Like, if I was going to leave academics, I wanted to leave the bench altogether. So I looked at a number of different options, tried a number of different things, was lucky enough to be at Stanford. Their business school and their design school run kind of mini little consulting forums that they do little consulting projects throughout the university. I was lucky enough to get on board with one of those to evaluate blood usage and wastage within their surgical units. That was fun, and sort of taught me that, just because your scientific degree is in something doesn't mean that you can't apply everything that you've learned as a scientist to other things, namely problem solving. And that's really what directed me towards consulting. I had a few friends who I was lucky enough to have in the consulting realm that got my resumes in front of the right people and got me interviews with some of the consulting firms. Really loved Deloitte for what they offered. Being a privately held company, it was a bit different than going someplace like a McKinsey or one of the more publicly traded companies. And so really liked that, spent 3.5 years there. Was actually not unhappy like being in consulting, but a friend of mine sent me the job posting for the foundation and said, oddly enough, this seems a lot like your last life and your current life, and a very weird blending of the two. You should totally check this out. I applied for the job. Back then, the foundation was about 35 people. I think I interviewed with about half of them to get the job, plus some of our board members, but took the job as the program manager for the cancer portfolio and haven't looked back since. As I said, I've been with the foundation 9 years. Throughout the trajectory, I will say mentors obviously played a really strong role for me, both formal and informal. I will say my graduate school advisor was an excellent mentor. I will note that maybe some of my mentors in my postdoc were, they taught me a lot of things maybe in the realm of what not to do. So both mentorship in a good and bad capacity have influenced the directions that I've gone. But one of the things that postdocing really did teach me, and then again, it was reinforced going into consulting, is you're very much in charge of your own career, and oftentimes you're not going to get the mentorship that you need directly in your line of report. And so I sought out informal mentors and have had a number of those as I was transitioning out of my more traditional scientific career, and then throughout the time that I was in consulting. And I've continued that. I still have really good connections to a lot of the mentors that I've had. I've gotten to watch them go to various places, and it's always wonderful to support and cheer them on as well, and provides new and interesting avenues, for looking at other things to do within the sciences. So I think that's great.
Thank you both for speaking about the evolution of your careers. I myself never thought when I was starting chemistry I'd end up in international trade. So I understand totally. It's wonderful to see how you've both moved into different things. As female role models in STEM, do you, and if so, how do you pay forward what you've learned as you progressed in your careers?
So I actually went to a women's college. So this has been something that's really near and dear to my heart for a lot of my adult life. And I was lucky enough to have a number of professors at Sweetbriar, as well as when I was at Johns Hopkins, who were able to set me up on a pathway to success. And I've really tried to make sure that I create opportunities for other people. What's interesting, though, is that until I came to the foundation, I had never worked for a women-led organization. I had had women bosses before, but having women at the top of an organization, I think, really does something unique to the culture, and it makes it easier to kind of champion that culture all the way through the organization and at every level. At the foundation, I would say we have more women than men who work on staff, and so it's been a completely different experience to some of my prior organizations where, as I said, some meetings I was the only woman in the room, and so having been there and kind of felt what that felt like, I'm very acutely aware that I have the ability to make others who might find themselves in that situation more comfortable, or to try to prevent them from being in that situation altogether.
Yeah, and I'm with Courtney. It wasn't until I got into consulting that I had a female boss, my first there, and then obviously working both with two very strong female leads at the foundation. But I look a little bit more like as to how to give back, that I've never once turned down an informal informational interview with anybody who's asked. whether those are postdocs coming off the bench. Many of my colleagues went other pathways and don't often understand the direction that I took either. And so, but they know when they've got another friend or another colleague who's like, oh my God, I've got to get out of science. I'm almost inevitably one of their first calls to be like, you need to talk to this person. They've done this. They know what's out there. They've made the transition. And so while it's exceptionally informal, I do think that that's a great way of giving back, because oftentimes people don't know and don't have direct connection to somebody who's made the transition out of the more traditional fields. I also try and, reinforce and work when I have the opportunities with, younger folks, both in college and high school. I won't say that I'm afforded those opportunities as often as I'd like, but I do take them when I can, and appreciate having the ability to talk to younger folks about, different avenues, because science is a very eclectic field to go into, and I think that that's not often shared, especially with women at at their young age, where they're actually making decisions about what they want to do.
Thank you. So I'd like to ask you, please, how would you each say that technology and/or your roles in science have changed during your careers? And could you also give one example of how you addressed or turned around a significant challenge during your careers?
I can take a start for that, and I'll start with the technology piece. Not to basically make it sound like, oh, in my day, we did all of these things, but our generation of scientists, because Courtney and I are approximately the same age, really were sort of on that beginning transitional cusp, as everything was going from, let's call it, more traditional wet lab science that was kind of brute force, to a lot of blending that with high throughput technologies. I'll date myself here. I use some of the early Agilent and early Affymetrix arrays, which I think Agilent still exists. Affymetrix definitely got subsumed by someone along the way. But, and it's only the idea of high throughput and high data, and the idea of blending of advanced mathematics and computational biology with actual wet lab science has only been, I'd say it's probably on Moore's law kind of trajectory, but, that's what we've sort of faced over our time. And even in my transition from graduate school, which was all bench-based and very little informatics, into my postdoc at Stanford, had I gone on to become faculty, my K-99 was actually the cross-training I was going to do was in a computational lab. And so we've had no choice but to kind of move and shake with the times. And I imagine every scientist sort of feels that way, that things start to grow. But I was reminded again, I was at a conference last Friday. I've been off the bench 15 years, and there were presentations going on that there are now discoveries that weren't even in existence during my postdoc. Like, we didn't even understand the concept of what was being presented, and I started to feel a little old. But, so I think but I think that is also, I guess I can say, we're also of the generation, I think there is a loving term, either Zennials, or sometimes we're referred to as the Oregon Trail generation, which, again, if you're in part of our generation, you understand this, the old Apple II GS games that you played. But it puts us right on the cusp of the Gen Xers and the millennials. And so we remember a time without cell phones. We also basically, for our formative years of high school, college, we had cell phones. And so we've basically been straddling technology most of our lives. And so I think that, we were very well equipped to do that even in science. So I think that was an advantage to us. As for challenges, I will say, I think my greatest challenge was wrapping my head mentally around the fact of I was leaving academics, and that basically after 11 years of training to do something, I was basically chucking it out the window, and I was going to go do something entirely else. One, you have a bit of an identity crisis that, oh my God, I thought I was this person, and turns out you're not really that person. And then two, it's really scary, like, to just kind of say you're going to do something. And while I had friends, that got me the interview, I moved to DC and I knew a total of 2 people. And obviously you move around a lot as an academic and you may not always know people, but you always have sort of an embedded infrastructure. that, is part of the academic forum. Not so when you decide to transition out and try something new. So I think just really coming to terms with that and kind of starting what essentially was a new life, I think that was probably one of the larger challenges I had.
Thank you. And Courtney?
Yeah, thinking back to, the wet lab work that I was doing in college and in grad school, where you have to run one experiment at a time, and how things are so fast today, that it's really pushing some really great boundaries on how quickly and how robustly we're able to make strides forward. I think that the other thing, just in my own perspective, is kind of making that shift from, being a mile deep on one really specific thing to being a few inches deep on an entire, space of medical research. And I've actually always been a little bit better in the breadth compared to the depth. And so I think that was one thing that that really pushed me away from the bench science of needing to be an expert on one cell receptor or one protein folding mechanism or one piece of DNA. I think that in general, Stacey's really touched on I put in the chat the geriatric millennial life of kind of moving from analog to digital. And I'll say, even when I started in my first tech transfer position, we were still paper files. So it wasn't just in the sciences, but in the business side of the world as well. Keeping track of everything in a file room and needing to send things FedEx for wet signatures because we didn't have DocuSign or Adobe Sign or any of those things. So being in government at that time, and knowing how slowly technology on the business side of government can get adopted, I did watch that transition happen in slow motion, but it really accelerated the business side of science as well, because we could work with partners more quickly. We could get agreements in place for our scientists at a rapid pace, and then we were also able to start to see connections between what partners were interested in, moving into databases where we were able to pull information out, not just on the science side, but on the competitive business side as well. I think has really changed the landscape of public-private partnerships and made it easier for us to identify who we should be reaching out to for particular opportunities, or where we should take the direction of a particular project based on what we know across the board, rather than having that all isolated in specific pockets of information. I think in terms of problem solving and overcoming a challenge, my biggest one that jumps to mind was a particular project that I worked on while I was at the National Institute of Standards and Technology, that I had inherited from another person in the office after I had changed roles, and did not have a complete picture of information as to where we were on that particular project. And so I walked into an interagency meeting. So this is the heads of tech transfer of about a dozen R&D agencies, each one with their own mission and their own protective areas and their own goals, who are supposed to be working together, but sometimes that's a little bit more ideological than actual. Walked into this meeting thinking that everyone was on board with moving forward with this project, and that we were at the point of talking about how we were going to do it, as opposed to if or why we were going to do it. And so I had come thoroughly prepared with various options on different types of data agreements and different ways that we could work around some of the privacy restrictions around the tech transfer data question. And the meeting quickly spiraled down into people shouting that China was going to steal all of our information and that no one was going to participate in this project. And I'm pretty sure I might have cried in the car all the way back from DC to the office. But was reassured that it was not the end of the world. And it did take an awful lot of diplomacy, a lot of individual meetings, a lot of reassuring and convincing and reworking. But eventually we were able to move forward with that project and produce something useful out of it. But the lesson that I learned there was make sure you know exactly what you're walking into, and that you've verified kind of where people are on any particular set of goals and objectives. But having gone through that, the next time that I was working on a major interagency initiative, I kind of knew up front what I was going to be up against and was able to take the time and the stakeholder engagement processes to make sure that didn't happen a second time. And so even though it took me 2 years, I was able to get all 11 R&D agencies to agree on a legislative package that made everyone happy. So it was probably one of the greatest achievements of my career at that point.
Thank you both for your insights, and particularly about your successes that you've experienced. So segueing off that, we do have ARC scholars in the audience, some PhD candidates, some undergraduates. What advice would you share with them? I've been hearing one word specifically, flexibility, but please expand upon it.
I've had the interesting opportunity, I suppose, to almost every job that I have taken in my career, other than the very first tech transfer fellowship that I did, and then I guess when I served as the acting director of the NIST Tech Transfer Office for about a year and a half, every role that I moved into didn't exist at the time that I had taken my previous job, and I actually do count. When I came to the FNIH, because that had previously been one associate vice president role that then got split out into 3 associate vice president roles. And so it was kind of a new space of dividing and collaborating. And that's simultaneously awesome and terrifying, because on the one hand, you really get the opportunity to define what you want that role to be. And in some cases, these roles are because I explicitly asked for them and designed them and wrote a job description for them. It's also terrifying because you're kind of stepping out into the unknown, and kind of not having anything to compare your performance to, or anyone who had been in that role previously to kind of give you guidance and insight. It's a very self-reliant pathway. But it is interesting that that's kind of been my career trajectory for probably 5 or 6 different career moves. So I guess I am the Oregon Trail generation after all. Really, the other thing that I would say, though, is that I think women in particular are frequently beset by imposter syndrome, and I think that there is almost a tendency to try to over-counter that. And what I've told myself, and what I've told anyone who's ever worked for me at any level and in any role, that you're not going to know what you're doing right away, and that's okay. That probably for the first 6 months of any role, whether you are at an entry-level position or the CEO of a company, you're just not going to know yet. And it's okay to ask people, and it's okay to make mistakes during that time, and it's okay to ask for more information, because nobody should have this expectation that they're going to jump into a new role and hit the ground running. And so I've actually just passed that 6-month mark in my new role, and it definitely did take that time to learn. I had been in the organization, but learning how that particular department in the organization worked differently, and the different people, the culture is a little different, the workload is certainly different, the systems and processes are different. So wherever you're going, give yourself that grace to not know what you're doing for a little while, and I think it'll serve you better in the long run.
Thank you, Stacey.
to pick up on that last kind of thread from Courtney, I agree. It is also counsel I have given every person that, so when I started at the foundation, it was just me in the cancer portfolio. I've built that team to about 8 and taken on other teams and built those up. And every single person I've brought into this organization, I tell them at 3 months, you're going to think you know what's going on. At 6 months, you might actually know what's going on. But in all of that time, again, I encourage folks to ask the questions. And so I think that's sort of where I'll step off, and that'll be my first piece of advice is never be afraid to ask the questions that you don't know the answers to. It's fine. Like, nobody's going to know everything. You just can't. It's not possible in this world. And whether or not that, as scientists, we just get used to that, and it's slightly more comfortable for us to ask the questions of the unknown. I don't know, but it's definitely an advantage in the business world, because a lot of people are too scared, especially when I was working in consulting and you worked with the junior staff. They thought that they had to know everything walking into a meeting, and they never realized that at 22, walking out of an undergrad degree, there isn't any way possible they're going to know everything that they need to know. But that's sort of this weird premise that they get. And I don't know whether that's, just perpetuated in the training these days or that sort of thing. But I guess, the one good thing of being a scientist is we were always taught to ask questions, and that it was acceptable to do so. And to do so in business, you have to do it strategically, and you have to do it in the right way. And there's definitely, a different sort of tenor as to how to go about it, but it's still a very useful skill. I'd say the other piece of advice is, where Courtney had the trajectory of sort of stepping into the unknown and creating her own positions, I often jumped feet first into things that I didn't really know how to do. The positions may have been there, but it was never something that, I had been trained to do. And so you have to become very comfortable with making decisions and moving through the world with a bit of ambiguity and a bit of uncertainty. And that, again, especially if you are a type A person, which many scientists are, that, you're going to make decisions on half information and as much as you know at the time, and that's okay. And sometimes moving forward is good enough to get started. It doesn't have to be perfect. And so allow the ambiguity, be okay with that, sit with that. It's okay. You're not going to know, one, you're not going to know all the answers. Two, you can ask questions, as I said in the first piece of advice. And then finally, to Courtney's point about sort of making the jobs that she wanted, I've been in jobs that while the job existed, things that we didn't necessarily exist. And I tell my teams this, and they are somewhat appalled with me, that you're going to make shit up as you go along. Sorry, excuse my language, but it's true. Like, and that's okay, because you're doing it from a point of knowledge. You're doing it from a point of background, and what you are creating is the next generation of what will be and what will then be taught to others. And that is okay. That you should be comfortable, and you should trust yourself enough when you get to a certain level that creating new things and creating new paradigms, perfectly acceptable. And that's actually part of your job. So again, you got to go through the questioning and the ambiguity. And then once you get there, sometimes you're creating new things out of the ambiguity because you have to, and that's okay.
Thank you. Well, we appreciate what you've been sharing with us. And now I'd like to turn to the audience for questions. Let's see what the audience has on their mind. Laura, would you share some of the conversation and questions you've seen come up during our talk?
Sure, I'd be happy to. This has been just a great discussion. You are all so impressive, have made such wonderful careers, and are just such great role models. One of the questions that came up, and you may have answered it, but I thought I would just ask it again. What advice would you give a young woman just getting started in STEM, and advice that would help her stay in STEM as well?
Yeah, that's a great question. And first, I would say, make sure that whatever you're doing in that career in STEM is something that gets you up in the morning. There's always going to be bad days and crummy things that you have to do. And so, deciding that this is where I'm really making a difference, and I can put up with the crummy things, I think is really important. Beyond that, find the person who's going to champion you when you're not in the room. I think it is so important. There's sort of an adage that women are over mentored and under championed, and particularly when you can't be there for whatever reason, the person that's going to give you credit for the things that you worked on, or the person who's going to suggest you for the next opportunity, it is something that is transformational, not just in STEM, but I think particularly in STEM. It's so important because of the drop off of women as they progress in their careers.
Yeah, I think I'd just counsel, because again, I saw that, the idea is to have them stay. Don't get too focused on what it is that you train to do in STEM. Like, to Courtney's point, we often end up going 5,000 miles deep in a particular topic. Don't lose out, and don't underappreciate the other skills that your education is teaching you. It's going to teach you how to problem solve. It's going to teach you how to learn new things. It's going to teach you to look at problems in a new way that other people don't. And whether that's science, whether that's mathematics, whether that's engineering, I think it's probably true of all of the STEM fields. They have that commonality. And so don't underappreciate that. Also, if you find yourself in STEM and you find yourself going down a pathway and you realize, as I did, you get really into it and it's then not the pathway for you, don't be afraid to look for things to cross train in. And I think Courtney noted this too when she was transferring into tech transfer. And sometimes I will encourage you to cross train in the skills that are, as a STEM person, probably going to make you uncomfortable. Meaning, go seek out, the idea of what those soft skills are. How do I communicate with people? How do I work with people who are not me and don't actually understand what it is that I do, and I need to explain to them what it is that I'm doing? Those type of skills are going to be so eminently transferable. And they're going to allow you to stay with your science, but use it in a different manner. And so, or math or engineering, all of the above. So I think those are the pieces of advice that I would give to anybody that, don't be so focused on what it is you think you're training to do, because your training is actually going to teach you and make a lot of avenues available to you. The joke from a friend of mine, as I was leaving my doctorate degree, is, now you have your PhD, people are going to hire you to do things you're entirely unqualified to do.
That's terrific. Thanks so much for sharing. And as Malia posted in the chat, get comfortable being uncomfortable is such a great reminder. Another question that came up is, do you have any go-to phrases or approaches that you utilize when you need to be more assertive in a discussion and do not want to come across in a negative way?
I can take a first stab at this. I mean, one of the things that consulting taught me is that the client is always right. Even when the client is wrong, the client is always right. And so you can often get people to think about other ideas, one, by posing what you would propose as an alternative as a question, like, have you thought about doing it this way, or have we considered this, that sort of thing. It allows it to be a discussion versus an assertive kind of authoritative way in. I will say that there are going to be times, it is inevitable, you are just going to have to take the direct route. You are just going to have to say what it is that you wish to say. When those times come, keep it to the facts, keep it as straightforward as possible, and try and keep as much emotion out of whatever statement you're making as you can. And oftentimes it will come across important and assertive, but it won't come across that you are trying to be negative about a particular situation. You are offering alternatives.
Yeah, those are really great points. I'll add that sometimes it helps to to find out what the question is beneath the question, or what's really underlying, the objection or the criticism, because oftentimes we try to address what's on the surface, and it turns out to not be the issue at all. And so sometimes, probing on what's really going on underneath that that question or challenge can be really helpful. I couldn't think of any specific phrases, but I could think of something not to do, because I worked with someone once who, very, very talented in her field, but would always start off with, "I'm sorry, but," when she was trying to, convey facts. And I kind of wanted to reach across the table and say, "Don't apologize for being right." I think that we kind of have these tendencies to couch being right in some softer language, but never apologize for being right.
Thank you, Courtney. That is so true. I think women apologize way too much. So thank you for making that point. So I have a question. I recently watched Lessons in Chemistry on Apple TV. I don't know if anyone's read the book by Bonnie Garmis or watched the show with Brie Larson. I think it shows women in a very positive light in science. And I just wanted to get your impression, if you've seen it or read the book, as to if you think that is a way to help promote women in science.
So I haven't seen the show. I definitely want to. It's on the to-do list, but I have read the book. Loved the book. I do think that showing strong female scientific characters in a light where they are unapologetic and can be the heroine of their own stories is absolutely beneficial. And I only wish we could do and have more of those out in the world. I strongly endorse.
So I confess I have not seen the show or read the book, but it's on my Apple TV want to watch list. Agree 100% that the more that younger women see themselves in the leadership, whether that's in STEM leadership or political leadership or business leadership, the easier it becomes for them to continue to move forward. I have been reading a book called The Exceptions, which is about Nancy Hopkins and the women at MIT and Harvard who were on the forefront of biochemistry and molecular biology in the 70s and 80s. And I can only read a couple of chapters at a time because it's very infuriating, the misogyny and other challenges that they went through, to make it easier for people like Stacey and I to be where we are today. So if you have the patience for it, I highly recommend it.
Perfect, thank you. One other question that popped up is, let me get it. So does FNIH have programs or initiatives that support or impact young women in STEM, such as internships and shadowing?
So internally, our CEO, Julie Gerberding, mentorship is a huge part of her leadership. And so there's always opportunities to mentor people across the departments and within the departments. We have talked about an internship program for several years on and off, and it hasn't been implemented yet, but certainly something that we're thinking about in terms of how we can help the foundation grow and be more involved in that space. We have had opportunities to work with the Office of Women's Health Research at NIH. In particular, they created a Women's Scholars Program that's attached to one of our public-private partnerships in autoimmune and immune-mediated diseases, since those predominantly affect women. And there are 4 scholars that were given funding from the Office of Women's Health Research to do additional scientific analysis towards the goals of that program. And then, we women's health is a place that we're exploring very heavily. It was a panel at our Team Science Day event that we held up in New York back in September. And really, I think one of the most well-received and most talked about panels of the entire day. And so figuring out how we can help move the needle in that space, and that would certainly involve opportunities for women in STEM there as well. Stacey?
Yeah, I don't know that I have much more to add about the foundation's efforts specifically, other than, and it isn't so much, I guess, young women in STEM, although I guess that depends on how you define young and whether you go with the NIH definition of young investigator being under the age of 51. We have always, for our larger partnerships, that we put together that are cross-stakeholder representation, especially when we are selecting our industry members to participate, we try very hard to find women to serve on the executive and steering committee levels because we want their voices there. I will say, and I'll shout out to the group, it's hard. It's hard to find those women in the senior leadership. I mean, and one of the things that we've done is we've actually encouraged senior members of our industry partners to begin bring people to us that they want to see grow and train up through those roles, and we will take them into the positions even if they aren't necessarily have the same title possessed that as maybe some of their colleagues that are going to sit on the committee do, because we just find it very challenging and very hard that we cannot find women in these positions when we wish to have them there, and nor do we wish to overburden the women who are already in those positions, because we know they get asked to do a lot of things and it takes away from other things because they are they're just so few in number, and it is not fair to put it all upon them.
Great. Well, thank you. Thank you for sharing. So before I turn it back to Elli to wrap up, I just wanted to ask Courtney and Stacey if you have any final comments or thoughts that you'd like to share.
Mm-hmm.
There's two things that that I kind of always keep in my back pocket in terms of motivational quotes, or things, reassuring things. One is that confidence is working hard, knowing your stuff, and then showing your stuff. And so don't be afraid to show your stuff. The other is thinking about jumping off into the abyss, and decision making in the unknown. I got a very helpful rubric from one of the email newsletters that I subscribe to, that said some decisions that you make in your life are hats, and if you don't like it after you put it on, you can take it right back off. Some decisions in your life are haircuts, and you might have to live with a bad haircut for a little while, but it'll eventually grow out. And some decisions that you make in life are tattoos, and once you make them, it's very, very hard to take them back. But most of the decisions in your life are going to be hats or haircuts. There's very few decisions that are actually tattoos. So I'll leave you with that.
I mean, I love that last piece, because again, I would encourage anyone to experiment with things that you don't necessarily know whether or not you're going to like them. To Courtney's point, sometimes they're just going to be hat decisions, and they won't, it won't affect you that greatly if you've made those decisions. I guess I always, I'll go back to the mentorship discussion. If you feel in the position that you're sitting in, wherever you are at in your journey in STEM, that you are not getting the mentorship that you need to have, don't apologize. Don't even ask. Just find the person that you need to mentor you. And honestly, especially if it's women who have come up through STEM, they are going to 90% of the time be very generous with their time. They know where you're at, they know where you're coming from, and they understand that you're probably not seeing the mentors that you need to see in the places where you're at. And so don't hesitate. The worst they can say to you is, I don't have time right now. And most of the time they will probably then refer you to somebody that they do think would be an excellent mentor and has the time. So please don't ever hesitate to do that.
Thank you both for your words of wisdom and your wonderful advice and your time. And I'm going to turn it back to Elli to wrap things up.
Thank you, Laura. Unfortunately, our time has come to an end. Stacey and Courtney, your careers have been so interesting. You both have contributed so much to science, and particularly through FNIH, society's well-being. I want to thank you both for sharing so many insights and practical advice with us. I would also like to thank all of you in the audience who've taken the time out of your life to join us today. Stay safe, stay healthy.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.